Hello everybody and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 3, Workflow. I'm your host Matt Lawrence and I'm joined again by my co-host Mike Curran. How's it going?
It's going pretty good, Matt. Just this week, just started working on some Vue.js stuff for the first time. That was pretty cool. So I'll have some new projects up on the Hat HTML All the Things soon. Stay tuned.
Yeah, we were taking a peek. We were taking a peek before the show, and they were pretty interesting. I might actually throw my hat in the ring and look at some Vue stuff. And it takes a lot. It takes a lot to convince me to use any sort of tool, as we'll find out here in this episode.
Oh, yeah.
So
that's for sure.
Myself, I've just been doing the daily grind, just taking calls, doing the web development game, and really hitting the social media game hard. So one of the things that I think one of the skills I guess that we need really, really bad is definitely social media marketing. We've always or at least I have always kind of paid attention to social as I take some pictures on Instagram and stuff like that as a very kind of hobbyist thing. And, been really kind of diving in and seeing what hashtags work, what times work and that type of thing on all the different social medias. So that was my week. And then this episode, of course, will be specifically about our workflows, both our personal workflows, so individual, as well as our collaborative workflows working together as a company on various projects. We'll be including things such as we use different file structures for saving. Do we use IDEs and that type of thing? We have a few segments, of course, and I'll just go over them really brief right now. So segment number 1 is going to be infrastructure. Segment number 2 is going to be Mike's workflow. Segment number 3 is going to be Matt's workflow or my workflow. Segment number 4 is going to be working together - collaborative workflow. And then we have our recurring segment now, Web News, and this one is titled App Overload, and I'm sure some people are already cringing in the audience there after hearing that one. But let's jump right in here to segment number 1, infrastructure, and we have a bit of a strange infrastructure beginning. So just a brief overview of that. What I mean by infrastructure is how we got started as a company. So one of the main things is Mike and I didn't start Digital Dynasty Design apart. It wasn't like we were both freelancers and decided to go together. We both started together immediately. So we needed some sort of structure and infrastructure to learn I need everything saved in one spot. So we actually started with OneDrive. Now OneDrive is Microsoft's cloud storage solution. And we had a very specific folder structure. We had we put, these ones need dates, these ones need to be in the customer file, these ones need to be in the asset file, etc., etc., etc. But as we sort of grew, we kind of started seeing the limitations of OneDrive. And it's not OneDrive's fault at all because it was working for us the whole time. It was because it's not meant for what we were using it for. So we had a bunch of problems coming up I would be working on, let's say, the DOM of a page. I'd be working on the HTML. And let's say I just had an inline script in there. And obviously Mike is more of the backend guy, so he wants to hit that script. And he would jump in and I would still have it open on my computer. And then we'd have 2 of these programs, or 2 of the same file. Because OneDrive will be there's a conflict, I'll just make a copy so you lose nothing. Which is nice, but then the program doesn't work because there's stuff going on everywhere. Luckily, the various changes were still saved, but it's a big disaster. So as we kind of moved on and kept going and going and going, we had to sort of keep working more collaboratively because projects started getting more complex from just static sites. And we had to slowly start branching out and start using more tools. And we really needed version control. So we had a very rudimentary version control that we did with our file structure on OneDrive. So we would have a specific date thing. So our thing was you put in square brackets the date, which was 4 digits year - 2 digits month - 2 digits day. And so then the file system would automatically sort in order, by the year, month, and the day, which version you were on, and then you would upload your changes, and then you had a master copy. Not fantastic, but it did work, and it did get us up and going. And then we started, and Michael touched on this part, then we started needing holy crap, we need version control, and we started using Bitbucket and later GitHub, and I'll let Mike kind of talk about that one.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, we probably should have started with version control systems like Git right away, but I think it was a little bit daunting for us, just because it was another command line interface to learn, and we didn't really understand the principle behind it, and we only got the principle once we actually started using OneDrive and found its shortcomings. So like when we got into Git, we just decided to use like the best free one out there that we could have private repositories, which was Bitbucket at the time.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think that was a good choice. We had a little bit of experience with one of our clients, where we had to kind of integrate with their projects, so that kind of stepped over the hurdle that we had with, like, I guess you could call it fear of using Git. So as soon as we had that first project under our belt, we just like went almost fully into Git. Now, this is only for the website and the web development part of our business. We still keep our documentation and stuff like that on the OneDrive because we have Office 365 for our business, so tons of space there. And I think that's a good backup solution for us as well. We even back up the OneDrive incrementally. We have an automatic script running that'll do a backup of the OneDrive once a week, and we keep the last like 7 backups or something like that. So I think so far we haven't had any loss of data. I don't know if you can remember anything. Maybe some small things here and there, but we've been doing pretty well. So yeah, like Bitbucket. Then moving on to GitHub. Obviously, for this project, we chose GitHub because, regardless of the fact that it was bought by, was it Microsoft that bought GitHub?
Microsoft bought it. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So regardless of that fact, and everyone switching to GitLabs, we still think it's a pretty established community. And we like the open source aspect of it, and we want to make sure that most of our content that we develop for Hat is open source. And that's kind of the reason we went with GitHub. Really, the differences between Bitbucket and GitHub, like, there's barely any differences between the two, which is nice.
And they're both Git, right? Git's like a
standard. They're both using Git as the version control system, so all the skills are transferable. It's literally just a different platform and different hosting service, you could call it. Like, we could have our own Git bucket set up somewhere in our house, right? So we're just using these ones as a free option.
How are you managing personally? How are you managing the two services, like, on your local computer? Because you'll obviously have repos cloned from each of them. How do you manage that?
Yeah, so I actually leave my Bitbucket in, because it's for our work stuff, inside of the authentication management in Windows.
Okay.
So I don't have to log in every time. But for Hat, I'll just literally input my username and password every single time I do any sort of commits.
Okay.
I think that's okay, and I like putting in my password every time I do a commit too, because it gives me that mental check every time. So I don't usually let my IDE save my password, just because, like, as soon as I'm putting in my password, I do a little mental check being like, do I really want to do this commit? And obviously most of the time I do, but sometimes I can catch myself and be like, oh yeah, I forgot that one thing. So that's kind of my part of my workflow. So actually, which leads right into the next segment, which is my workflow. So let's get down to kind of like the applications that I use. So I used to use Brackets, which was a pretty good IDE for doing any sort of web work. But as with the trends, I moved on to VS Code, Visual Studio Code, which is Microsoft owned as well. I think it's a great push by Microsoft to be releasing applications like this, because there used to be obviously Visual Studio, which was a fairly clunky application. I don't know if you ever used it, Matt.
I used it for I actually used like one of the old Visual Basics. So yeah. I think that, like, a part of that, I don't know exactly how that would work, but a part of that I think was in it. You know what I mean? Like, they kind of took inspiration. It's the same company for the IDE when you code in Visual Basic years ago now. So I might be talking about it wrong, but
yeah, like C# was code, like everything in C# was Visual Studio and stuff like that. I used to use Visual Studio quite often in university, but it was pretty clunky. Like, on my older laptop, it would take a minute to load, which is kind of ridiculous for an IDE nowadays. Yeah, but like you click on the button now for VS Code and it'll be like open before you can even press down. So I love VS Code for the speed, obviously, and the extensions. So there's great extensibility, and they're very simple to install and use. And it seems that there's a lot of people working with it. And since it's open source, which is another huge plus, thanks Microsoft, you can just take the code, extend it as you want. There is even a code base for what the VS Code was built on. So there's a code editor web app almost that you can just take and run in your browser, and you can build another web browser on top of that. I don't know, like I'm a big fan of the open source, especially for IDEs, because who knows what people are storing. I'm trusting, but to a certain degree now with all this information about Facebook being out that they've been doing stuff kind of shadily, I'm not a huge fan of just allowing people to take my information. So thank you, Microsoft, for allowing some sort of open web for us. So that's pretty much my main IDE right now. I'll still use Notepad++ sometimes, but that's mostly just to view certain files like JSON files if I don't want to just clutter up my VS Code. So other than that, I still use Xcode and Android Studio because I build web apps for conversion with Cordova. So I need to be able to go in and then add certain Android specific or iOS specific features. So when I need to do that, I build them all out in their specific studios. So like the Xcode for iOS and Android Studio for Android. I know that you can probably do everything in Xcode, not in Xcode, but in VS Code. But I just decided to use what's actually available just for those platforms. It's been working fine for me because I don't do too much specific app development for that. So then the next thing I would say would be my task management. So I use Asana and Todoist. Todoist is a pretty cool one. They're both web apps. They both run on all platforms. That's a big one for me. I think if you're choosing a to-do list or a task manager, I think you should definitely think about the future and not just go on the Mac store and type in to-do manager and then choose the first one on the Mac store, because most likely it's going to be Mac specific. And what happens if you for work have to use a Linux machine, or for work have to use a Windows machine, then you're going to have to convert to a totally different tool, and you'll have to have that learning curve again. Where if you pick something like Todoist, it's working on all the different platforms. And I kind of take that approach in almost all the tools that I pick. So the first thing with VS Code, actually, when I was researching it, I'm like, well, Visual Studio Code, this is Microsoft. There's no way it works on Mac. Go and check. It has a Mac version. I immediately install it. Even though I'm not a Mac fan, I understand that I'm going to need to use a Mac at some point, and I want to make sure that all the tools that I use are transferable for the most part. So those are my task management tools. They're pretty simple. Like they both have very similar functionality, and I'll kind of explain what I use them for separately in one of the later segments right now. So next we'll go on to version control, which we actually already talked about. So I'm just going to skip over that. GitHub and Bitbucket, you guys know about that already. So now for test servers, I use a Windows machine for the most part, so I just use XAMPP. I like its extensibility. I like the fact that you can change the host file, you can change the htdocs folder, a different one, whichever one you want. You can launch the server on load. I mean, it has all the basic functionality, has PHP, SQL. I don't really need much else. I know there's a bunch of them out there. I just decided to go with XAMPP at the start, and I've been pretty loyal to them ever since. On Mac, I use MAMP because it was just suggested to me to use that, and it seemed easy at the time. I don't use it very often, so don't have too much to say about it. So a big part of my coding is actually debugging, and I use Chrome DevTools very heavily for that. So putting breakpoints into your JS code is huge, and actually being able to see what's going on with every variable while it's on a breakpoint, to me, that's my bread and butter. Without that, I don't know how I would be doing this job. So the Chrome DevTools is by far the best debugging tool I've ever used, bar none. So the cool thing is it's extensible. So I just started with Vue, like I was saying earlier in the episode. You can install the Vue plugin for the DevTools, and boom, you can do any sort of debugging with Vue as well. So I there's not much more to say about that. I would highly recommend going in and looking for tutorials on how to use it if you haven't used the Chrome DevTools for debugging, because it was kind of like a big wide opening shock for me when I discovered it and realized why was I using console logs all this time, because that was ridiculous. So yeah, moving on from just specific tools and stuff like that, let's go into a more specific section. So my daily routine. So I'm going to talk about a productive daily routine. Now this, I try to do this every day. I'm not going to say I'm successful at it, but this seems to work the best for me as a structure for the day. So when I wake up, I check my to-do list and and prioritize my tasks. So I have all my tasks laid out. When I get a new work task, I'll put it in my to-do list. I might not prioritize it right away. Now, like I might not put a date on it, but I'll put it on my to-do list. And then depending on what happened at the end of the day, I'll take a look at it as well. So at the start of the day, I'll make sure that all my tasks are prioritized, which one I need to do today, which one I can leave for the next day, stuff like that. Then I'll go grab my coffee, eat breakfast, read some news for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then I'll go into my to-do list and I'll pick a task that'll take me probably about 10 to 15 minutes. Just because for me, it's kind of like get the ball rolling. I need to get the ball rolling, so I do something fairly simple. Obviously, not every day has a simple task on it, but most days will, and I'll knock that one out of the park. Then I'll start with a more complicated task, and I don't jump from simple to simple to simple to simple. I'll go actually from simple then to complicated, and because as soon as my brain starts moving in the morning, it really goes. I'm more of a morning person, as I found. So when I start to do the complicated tasks in the morning, I'll usually finish off with the more simple tasks throughout the day. So while I'm doing that, it's getting I have a daily stand up usually at around 1 p.m. my time, and I'll make sure that from around 12 to 1 I'll have a good half an hour of prepping for my daily stand up with one of our bigger clients. So I make sure I'm prepped for almost every single one because they go faster that way. I don't have to go in and look at what I've been doing and stuff like that. Stand-ups are important in my opinion because it really organizes the rest of your day pretty much. So after my daily stand-up, I'll go in and look at my priorities and be like, okay, well, we talked about doing this task. Maybe I should prioritize that one rather than this one, since this one obviously is not as important. So I'll redo my priorities, and I think that's okay to do. I know some people really like to set their priorities and just keep going with it. But I think if you go with it and you have something that changes throughout the day, it's totally okay to go back and reprioritize. So once I reprioritize, I just go about my work the same kind of way. I'll do task by task. I like the task management system. And it kind of gives me a sense of accomplishment as well as I'm doing it. And really that's it. So by the time 5-6 o'clock rolls around, I'm usually done most of my tasks. And I'll end the day I'll end the day with my task manager again, making sure that I check off the ones that I did, reprioritize the ones for the next day. So yeah, that's pretty much my daily routine. I'm gonna leave it off to you, Matt, to talk about your tools and then some other more specific business stuff.
Right. Yeah. So moving on to the next segment, which is my workflow. As you may have already got from an impression, I don't really use a lot of tools. I'm kind of more old school. I still like to keep that close to the metal, if you will, mentality. So
you're pretty much an 80-year-old man, Matt.
I'm pretty much an 80-year-old man. I put it this way: everyone on Linux, for example, uses Vim because it has colors. I use Vi, so
that's just ridiculous.
But the programs I use on a daily basis would be Notepad++ with no plugins. I don't know if there's any pre-installed plugins, but it's like the standard install. I just do the install for Windows and then I just leave it. So Notepad++. I use the CMD, and in the CMD, I specifically use things like the Node Package Manager, NPM. And then, of course, I'll use packages with CMD, compiling in SASS or SAS or whatever I'm working on. Because, again, I am a Windows user, as you touched on, Mike, I will use XAMPP. Specifically, I'll use the components on there, Apache, the MySQL, and then, by association, PHP, my admin as well, to sort of manage my databases. My Chrome is my personal browser, but it's also my primary development browser, so that's kind of like my primary browser, because I also have an Android smartphone, so obviously that kind of, in tandem, they go together. So I do use Chrome for that, and I do use those Chrome dev tools, like you had mentioned, and I am actually starting to learn those breakpoint things. I do remember that because I don't touch JS too much, so a lot of my stuff is visual. But I do remember you helping me while making the Berryflow app a while ago. Because I was like, man, I don't know what panel's open. And I was like freaking out a bit. And then you're like, oh, just break here and you can check the thing. So I'm starting to kind of touch more on the more intricacies of instead of using console log. So after that, I went to my testing order. I would say my testing order for browsers, because I have a whole bunch of browsers on my computer. So my testing order would be Chrome, because I'm developing in it, then Firefox, then Edge, and then Safari. So a little bit of reasoning behind that. Chrome obviously is my primary, so that's the reason for number 1. Firefox, I find I have to always add something or change something quite frequently, just because Safari and Chrome are very, very similar, I find, in terms of rendering everything. So Firefox seems to be just a little outlier. It'll just be like, oh, I need to add this little margin or something. It's not usually a big change, but it's enough for me to be like, okay, I want to check this next. Edge seems to be pretty good, actually. It's mostly when I get into animations. I don't know whether it's just the way I do animations and transitions, but I find that I have a little bit of problems in Edge there, so I have to do some tweaking. But since animations and transitions are kind of tertiary, usually, that's why I do that one third. And then Safari, like I said, very similar to Chrome, so it's kind of like a check, yep, it's good, moving on. To actually dive into the design process, I started using Balsamiq, or my Balsamiq, I suppose, a long time ago. Back maybe, I want to say 2 years, but it could be less. And then they transitioned, or they started opening up Balsamiq Cloud. So I started using that, and I have been using that quite frequently. And I'll get into why I specifically use Balsamiq Cloud in a bit. And coming soon, and I kind of want to create some content for HTML, all the things on this, but coming soon, I'm going to start using Sketch. And I don't use Sketch currently, and again, I'll explain that in just a moment. So I'll kind of jump in, I think, just to kind of change gears from, like, I don't really have a daily workflow. I kind of have like a project workflow. So my bread and butter within the company really is working on small business sites. A lot of the time, a small business site will be a small business basic site, and then I kind of do projects. So to dive into the first one there, small business basic site, what I start doing, and this is kind of my workflow for the project itself, so this could go over hours or over several days, but the general order for this type of project would be, I start gathering client objectives. So, do they need to process orders online? Do they need a lot of pictures? Do they just want almost like a digital business card? Are they just trying to get social media presence? What are they trying to do? I then gather resources from them. And this part's really key because a lot of clients actually don't know the first step. They don't really know their objectives sometimes. Sometimes they're just told, hey, go get a website. And especially if they're a new entrepreneur, they'll come to somebody and be like, hey, I need a website. But they didn't actually look into what a website really entails. Mm-hmm. So I'll gather like resources. And what I mean by that is something like example sites, design ideas, and I'll get them to like sort of list out things. So any site they want. So let's say they want a website based on they do wood carvings, let's say. I'll tell them, okay, go across the web. It doesn't need to be 2 wood carving sites. Go across the web and gather pieces of information for me. So if you really like the nav bar from this site, and you really like the footer from this one, and the slider from this one, and I'll take all of that, I'll make notes, and then those kind of like guide me in the direction. And then because this is a small business basic site, and I have those 2 pieces of information now, or 1 piece depending on what their goals are, I'll now make wireframes, and I'll make a few variants. So wireframes, of course, are mostly for layout and just basic design. And I'll start giving you, hey, do you like this? Do you like the full screen design? Do you want like parallax? Do you want this? Do you want that? What do you want? I then send the wireframes after they're complete for approval. And then I immediately create the approved design as an actual website. So this is the little kind of caveat in why I don't use Sketch. So a lot of the time, a small business basic site will be on a very strict budget. And a lot of other design agencies we find will do the wireframes, and they'll either present the wireframes to the client, or in some cases we've seen it where the wireframes aren't presented to the client. Everyone's different. And they'll just provide like a Photoshop or like a Sketch actual version, and they'll show that to the client, and the client will come back to them. But in order to cut down costs and to cut out a rather major step, what we do is we say, okay, I'm only going to give you wireframes, and then I'm going to literally make that layout for you. And this does lead to a little bit of confusion and a little bit of more tweaking than you would normally have on like a full website per se. But what it does is it cuts out that whole step of us, designing an entire, pixel perfect thing in Sketch or Photoshop, and then having the person come back and being like, let's just swap all of this. Let's just change it all. So we find that this is like a better way to work with small business clients. So we start doing that, and then we kind of, the final steps, we do like the final tweaks, like I said, change the colors, change this, change that, change a little bit of the workflow if they're doing it. And then a lot of the time, because they are small business clients, we do teach them. So we teach them how to use the CMS if there is one. We teach them, share this link, or, go this, or this is what you show other people, or this is the type of link you'll use on Facebook, etc., etc., etc. There's like a training element to it. It's a lot different than a larger client for sure. And that kind of concludes the workflow for our small business basic sites. In terms of projects, so like I said, one of my major things in the company is just straight up projects, and this is one of them. HTML of the things is one of them. And one of the major things that we'll do is an idea will pop up in my head, and I'll start jotting down ideas in a non-formal way, just brainstorming. Even if they're really out there, I'll just jot them down, usually in OneNote. And then I'll gather all my ideas together in a multiple page Word doc, and it's almost like a proper design document. So there's no like actual photos or pictures there, but I'll write out everything. Like, this is the goal, these are the features we're going to have, this is the most viable product, etc., whatever applies to the actual project itself. And I'll start jotting all this down and getting it all ready. At that point, I'll actually meet with Mike, usually over Skype or in person, and we'll, share the document and we'll go through. And then, of course, there'll be comments back and forth, feedback from Mike, feedback even from myself from just the conversation, and we'll tweak the document, and we'll make it basically its final revision after that. And then from there, usually in the meeting, we'll decide this is how we start the project. So whether we want to start developing, whether we want to hire somebody, whether we need to call a certain service provider, whatever, and then we just continue with the project based on that first step, and we just kind of go moving forward. So that's sort of my workflow. I don't have a daily workflow because I'm on projects and smaller business sites. So I'm kind of sporadic. I'm all over the place. One day I could be working hard, just sitting there, banging out a UI or a UX. But then the next day I could be just doing social media and preparing banners, or even just calling people. So I'm kind of all over the place. So, and I'm kind of like that in real life too. So I prefer this type of thing. So that's why Mike and I kind of work well together, because he seems to like the structure and I seem to like to go everywhere. So, but that kind of concludes my workflow. And it's a little all over the place, but it definitely suits me. I think we should move on to segment number 4, which is how do we bring all this together? So segment number 4, working together / collaborative workflow. So obviously we have very different ways of working together. And in the past, and I'll kind of get into the more specifics now. So we used to work on OneDrive, and I'm sure Michael will remember this. We used to work on OneDrive together, and a lot of the time it would be one of our computers would go down, or we would have like some internet connection problem, because I used to be on a rather old internet connection, or just, any other problem, and we would have a bunch of duplicate files in OneDrive because it's trying to save your conflicts. So I don't know if you want to touch at all on any of your memories on that, Mike, but
I mean, there was a few times when I think OneDrive even went down and we actually had merge conflicts. I think one of us I think I lost some work and stuff like that. I mean, it was kind of a ridiculous situation. I'm still on the fence with Microsoft stuff, but I think they are getting better. I really hope so. Especially with with their communications applications like Skype and these like their cloud applications. It's kind of iffy, and it's like their collaboration tools on Word, they're not good. I don't recommend. Maybe their web app is better because we haven't used that very often for collaboration.
Word Online,
yeah, Word Online. I think most of the time I will always prefer Google Docs rather than trying to collaborate on Word, because it would be bad if you had one tiny little version difference between you and another person, and then all of a sudden nothing works, and it's like a minute of delay between every edit. Like it's kind of ridiculous with how it is with OneDrive and Word, and like the combination of the two, especially right now we have this weird issue where if we work on a Word doc and it goes through like some sort of an upload center process, even though the upload center has been removed, I'll have like random errors where it'll tell me, oh, upload center can't upload your document because it's locked, even though no one has it open. And second of all, even if it is open, isn't there like some collaboration tools? Like I honestly, not only do I not understand how Word works right now, I don't even want to understand. So I'm okay with going to Google, or I'm okay with just using like very basic text tools if we need them. That's kind of where I'm at with that.
I'm definitely more of a Microsoft fanboy to an extent. Like I've always used Windows for my operating system, and we both do. Mm-hmm. So, but one of the major things I think is like I kind of really dove into Hotmail when it was purchased by Microsoft back in the day. So I've kind of always been with them, and I've always had like a Microsoft account, and I've always had like an Xbox even. Like I'm all over their ecosystem. I have my calendars managed by them. My tasks are managed by them if I do any like to-do stuff. My OS is them. You know, I'm all Microsoft, so I'm kind of definitely more of a fanboy because I like having one ecosystem cover as many bases as it can. And if Windows Phone was big, I'd probably have a Windows Phone, to be blatantly honest. And I'd use Cortana if she was everywhere, if she had like home products like the Google Home. So, I mean, Word, I think, is definitely going through a few growing pains because it was like just your standard, hey, this is a word processing thing, right? Whereas Google Docs, or is it Google Docs or Google Sheets? Google Docs, right?
No, Google Docs, yeah.
Google Docs is like it kind of grew up online, so it has that. Whereas this is like an old man being upgraded. So there, I do, you know what I'm saying though? Like it's Word, which is old. Like it's an older program that's gone through the test of time. So mine works good now. Like after all the updates, mine works good now.
But it's like it works good now, but you have to say now because you know in a future update something will go wrong. I don't know.
I will say that is something that I do need to like look out for, and I do ignore that a lot as a Microsoft fanboy. Full disclosure. So, I mean, OneDrive did work for us for a really long time, and we literally used it until it was at capacity of its own like we weren't using it for what it was meant for.
Correct. Yeah, that's true. So, yeah, like doing any sort of web development work on OneDrive while everything is synced is kind of ridiculous.
Exactly. So, and like I use OneDrive on my phone, which we're gonna get into, I'm sure, with the app overload section.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I'm a OneDrive. I'm a Microsoft fanboy. I use all their stuff. Just a full disclosure. I think what we should move on to too is the second part of this segment, which would be how do we divide up those parts in the project. So obviously, I was discussing like maybe I was in the DOM and you were messing around with the script or whatever. Yeah. So I'm more front end, as we said in the past, and Mike does more of the back end code and the engineering in that respect. And so kind of how we've slowly started chipping away, like obviously our very first projects were rather clunky, but we've sort of started developing processes, which I think is very key for even a small business, because then if I just like tell you, hey, I need this, I just know where it's going to be and what you're going to do via like the process we've preset up. It's not like you're going to be like, oh, I've updated it to my personal G drive with a share link. It's like, no, we never do that. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I know it's going to be in the Git, or I know it's going to be here, wherever. So what we do is we modularize. We've worked on modularizing projects, and we work on separate but yet complementing modules to get chunks of a project done. So we had a project that we were working on in which Mike needed to work on I think it was a Node application of some kind, I believe, and like I wasn't going to touch that at all. And he was working on the CMS of it as well. And so what I ended up doing was working on a very visual part of it, and I kind of like dove into a little bit of the back end on controlling that visual part. But that visual part is like a section of the UI that he needed.
Yeah, it was important to nail that down for this application. It was pretty much just a simple Node application where a user could add fields, edit fields, approve or deny fields. It was meant to be a collaborative workspace. That's probably the best way to put it, where people could add and remove text fields, add and remove pictures, and then be able to communicate with each other while doing it.
Right.
It's on the shelf now, but hopefully at some point we pick it up again. But pretty much like it's important. It was important for me to know the design aspect of it and the UX aspect of it, because a lot of my code was going to like complement that, or the other way around. Your design was going to complement the code. So you building out those components, those UI components, actually like dictated how I coded a lot of the different features.
Yeah.
So, and like we do it like you're gonna continue saying, but I'll just interrupt you for a bit. So we do it kind of like I know what features I can work on my own, where I don't need your UX yet.
Right.
And then I know what features I'm gonna need the UX part of it. So we kind of break it up like that. So if I am working on a bunch of features that don't need UX, I can work on those before I work on your features. So you'll have a timeline. I'll be like, I have like 3 days of work ahead of me. I don't need your stuff for those 3 days. So can you get me these, like, 3 or 4 things by those 3 days? And usually I can rely, like I can rely that you'll get those things to me. And by the time I finish that 3 days of work, I can continue. And it kind of works like that. And then once I get those 3 days of work done, I'll know while I'm doing it, I'll know that I'll need X, Y, and B as well. So after those 3 days, we'll have a meeting. We'll sit down and you'll be like, okay, listen, I did this, and you'll show me what you did, and I'll kind of like be like, okay, perfect. I can continue working on systems X, Y, A, B, C. Then can you work on systems X, Y, and B, or X, Y, and Z? And we kind of, I don't know what it would be called, like leapfrog or something like that. We just keep going in that kind of system until we get to the end where it's just finishing touches.
I think that's a really key point for you to bring up too, because like it's one of those things where you could essentially dive into systems that would rely on a UI, and you might make assumptions based on the UI UX where you might be like, oh, there's only going to be 3 boxes, I assume. But maybe, as the UX guy, I've decided, okay, we need a hide button and I need like a refresh button here. Exactly. And it's a real pain in the ass for either me to cut the UI's, refresh button or whatever, because it's going to throw off the rest of the user experience. And it's a real pain in the ass for you to add it later. So it's really key that we discuss, hey, we need, 3 buttons, 3 text box, or whatever we need. And then you go, okay, I need interrupts here, or I need a function here to interrupt this, or I need to pull this data out at this point, so I need to make it available. I think that that's very key, because yes, there are certain things like the login system. Obviously, that's username and password. Maybe a CAPTCHA, maybe a 2-factor. But
and maybe adding like Google authentication and all, like adding those things. Like even a simple thing as a login system, I think is a good point to point out, that it can start becoming kind of a hassle to do where you're not the UX guy. So let's say I were to design a login system, and then I would forget something like Facebook login or Google login, something like that, and then I would do it and show you and be like, well, where's the Facebook login? And I'd have to go back and add that Facebook login. Where if we were to design it together, you being the UX guy, you would have already pointed all that out.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's better to work that way. And as much as you think you can get everything correct in like a pre-designed document, as you start coding it, as people start using it with tests, it's going to change, and you need to be agile in that sense. And I think being able to do it in these segments also, while I'm coding it, I'll realize something. While you're designing it, you'll realize something. And it's a great way to not overlap those realizations as well.
Definitely, most definitely. It's one of those things where you don't want to be like double backing, I guess would be the word, double backing too much.
Yeah, for
sure. I think we should go on to code reviews, another part of this segment. So what we do as well is we do a lot of like the talk, right? Like what we were just discussing. We discuss the modularization, and we discuss, the workflow together, and we meld our 2 styles and our 2 tasks together. But then we still do take a break, and we do a code review or a peer review. And what we'll do is we'll just send a video with an explanation, or sometimes we'll be in person, or sometimes we'll do like a Skype call and we'll share the screen. Just anything to sort of show it, because those little issues like that Facebook login, for example, sometimes those things are, even if they're planned, they're just forgotten. And so the peer review will catch it early before like I make a profile page that demands the Facebook info. Mm-hmm. And then I gotta like rip that up and like redo it. So code review, and also new features are often talked about at this time too. Like sometimes we'll be like, hey, this is clunky, we need another button here. So you really need those milestone or interim little meetings, I find, to kind of catch up and get a little sanity check, and then you can align your deadlines as well. Like maybe something is taking much longer than it did, or maybe it's going much faster than we expected.
Yep.
So we can move things up. So like those little pieces are very, very key. I don't know if you had any comment on that.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point with aligning, I thought. So a lot of the time you'll estimate, 1 day for doing the login page, for instance, and then all of a sudden you'll hit a boundary because of the technology you're using, and you'll be like, listen, I need like 2 more days on this. And if you don't communicate that, if you don't have these like daily or by like a couple times a week stand-ups, you might fall extremely behind, or you might be desynced. So like the person that like the UX guy might think that we're way ahead, where the actual guy that's coding it might be way behind, and that can lead to stress as well. Like just not only like code wise, it can lead to stress personally. So it's important. I think it's important to always be communicative. So if you run into a roadblock, there's no problem with, I'll type Matt a message on Hangouts and be like, listen, I hit a roadblock here. I'm going to take a break for a little bit and then try to hit it again, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to finish it by the deadline. And usually you're pretty receptive of that, right? Like it shouldn't be an issue as long as I'm upfront with it. It's a problem becomes when I'm like doing something and I kind of get in my own headspace and I keep doing it and doing it and doing it and don't realize that I've gone over the time that I said I was going to. And then you come back and be like, listen, you said you were going to do this like 2 days ago, 3 days ago, but you haven't even messaged me about any of it. So that can generate some stress, and you want to alleviate that stress as much as you can as a coder.
It's definitely one of those things too. Is you want to keep the ball rolling. If you leave one person hanging for too long and they're waiting on a dependency, the motivation for a project often goes down. And to get back in that headspace of basically snowballing the amount of work you're doing, if you are if the project is losing its luster essentially, then you're going to have like a slower time moving forward as well. Mm-hmm. So, but it's like if everything's communicated, then you can adapt. And like obviously there's things that are out of our control, but you really should, as much as you can, keep the ball rolling to keep everybody interested, because you don't want to go AWOL on a login screen and then like 8 months later someone comes to you and be like, hey, I finished like the Facebook part, and you're like, well, I don't even remember what I did on that, so now I got to go spend a day figure out what I'm doing. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
Definitely try to mitigate the amount of time in between if you can. I think one of the other things that we should mention too, to sort of manage this, one of our processes probably is we use a couple of different management methodologies and management project management software. So we specifically use Asana. We have a free account with Asana, and we use that as like, we have tasks on there. And we'll, create in Asana, you can create a project, and then we just use like the basic to-do stuff, or there's like sort of like a column-based board now. I forget what they exactly call it now, but we'll use that where I can see that something's checked off. So there's been times where, let's say Mike finishes something, and I'll see that it's just checked off, and I'll like go and ask, be like, yo, is this done? Can I like jump into this now? Mm-hmm. So there's times like that where it's like maybe he just finished it and he hadn't communicated, he's going to talk to me later. I just noticed it, and then I got a little bit of a head start. So Asana is helpful for stuff like that. And then we've also used a physical whiteboard. So I don't know if you want to comment on our processes with that, because I think you developed one of the sticky note process or whatever on there.
Okay, well, I wouldn't say developed. I've seen it before, but mainly I wanted to use it because I was watching Silicon Valley at that point, and they had. I really like their little task management system on the whiteboard, so we kind of copied what they had there to a certain degree, where you just split up all your tasks into small little sticky notes. Anything that you can write on a sticky note can be a task, and then you break it up into different categories like front end, back end, UX, UI, animation. Like we kind of split it up into many different columns, and then we had a completed column. So every time you completed something, you ripped it off the column and put it into the completed. You can kind of follow your progress as with a physical little snap onto the whiteboard. It was pretty satisfying. I liked it. We don't get to do it as much anymore because we're both busy, and we kind of do the Asana task management system nowadays.
And a lot of like digital chat, whether it be Skype or whatever.
We don't have very many overlapping projects. Although Hat is a big overlapping project, we kind of decided to go on a more like individual route where you'll do your thing, I'll do my thing, and we'll kind of combine it together into Hat. right? So that we can get even more content up and make sure that our content is kind of individually synced. I mean, that's not to say that we're not going to have another big project where we're going to have to do more collaboration. I kind of like those projects as well, but for now we're moving into a more individual task basis. I could see us, in a month or two doing something bigger.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things I think we should mention too, and I think we'll cover this a lot we'll probably have either a separate episode for this or an episode that kind of more focuses on this, but I think we've mentioned this also a bit. HTML, all the things, is sort of based on all of the processes and all the projects that we've planned. HTML, all the things, is sort of like the master idea of all those things. We've had several failures, which we're definitely going to have an episode focused on some of our failures. But we've had like a lot of failures, a lot of like semi-successes, a lot of successes in various spaces, depending on the goals of the various projects. Mm-hmm. And I think that HTML, all the things, kind of takes all those ideas and goes, well, hey, let's we always go back to web development and design. Why don't we make a project that actually just promotes that almost? We can use it as a portfolio piece. It's its own thing, like the podcast, like the articles, like whatever. And that all stacks on the portfolio. It keeps everything fresh. So like I don't think you would have tried Vue without it, for example. So now you've tried Vue, you're developing stuff for a project. Now you have that skill. If someone calls us and needs something done in Vue, you can do it. So it's like this whole, like it's the biggest complementary project, I guess is the way you'd say it. So, as the reason why I even mention this is your first few ideas might be bad, they might fail, or they might totally crash and burn right from the conceptual stage, but you'll develop a way to filter ideas and systematically decide, this is the idea I want to do. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of one of our first real big, like, this is what we want to do. This makes the most sense for our current situation.
Yeah.
I think it's time to move on to the recurring segment that does not yet have an intro. We currently call it Web News. It was my turn to bring a conversation piece this week, and I brought app overload. So as we know, we've just talked about a bunch of workflow things, including chat, and we all do, I would say, suffer from an app overload. There's so many chat programs out there: Microsoft Teams, Slack, Stride, Twist, Skype. I think one of those got shut down recently or something. I don't remember. The
Atlassian one just got bought out by Slack.
Oh my god! So the landscape is ever changing, clearly,
yeah.
And that is only a very small taste of all the chat programs out there. Not to mention WhatsApp and every other thing.
You haven't even touched on the Google ones.
I haven't even touched on the Google ones.
There's only 45 Google chat applications.
Friggin' Hangouts and Allo and Duo and...
Yeah, there's Hangouts and Hangouts Chat. Don't forget about that. Those are two completely separate applications that don't even have the same developers.
I didn't know that. So That's good. I'm getting overloaded just talking about this segment. But we also have an other. So if you're trying to manage your finances on the go or whatever, or you're trying to research stuff or whatever, you have QBO, so QuickBooks Online. You got your Reddit, your Facebook, your Twitter, like your social stuff. You got your podcast apps if you're whether you're listening for fun or listening for education. You got your podcast apps, and then you got, if you're a web dev, you got to have all your test browsers. So there's a bunch of browsers on mobile that you probably should have on at least a test device. You can kind of give it a go. So it's app overload, and I listed a whole bunch there, and it's hardly anything. And I think one of the things I wanted to mention was, don't let it overload you. So one of the things that I've started doing is I have actually stopped all push notifications from social media. So for example, Facebook, like some people will talk to me primarily on Facebook Messenger. I will leave the Facebook Messenger push notifications on because it's just a chat program. But I will, mute Facebook, and I will just check it daily or check it whenever I want to, because those notifications are, whether they're likes, comments, or whatever, they don't necessarily need my direct attention. Same with Instagram. I'm active on there, definitely active on there, and so is HTML, all the things. But I'm 100% not going to have to check every single time someone likes or follows us. I can check it in 3 hours and it's going to be fine. I can check it in 30 minutes and it's going to be fine. So that helps with the app overload. And then some of the other stuff is I'll file away things. So I kind of make it so that anything that I have to do on QuickBooks, which is our accounting software, I will specifically do it on the PC, on the computer, but I will have the app installed, and it's kind of optional, but I will have the app installed in case I'm out and about and it's like, hey, this person really needs their invoice today. So I can quickly, bang it out, and I'm not worried about fumbling with installs and trying to remember my password and stuff like that. So, and then podcast apps, it's its own thing, almost like chat apps, where we got, right now I'm using Google Podcasts as well as Castbox. I also use, I just cringe listening to all this. I also use, or I have used Podbean, and I also, this is just ridiculous already. I also have iTunes to test that. So the iTunes desktop application, at the Apple Podcasts on my iPad. This is ridiculous. So it's podcast, and they're all okay. They all work, so, yep. And they all got their main thing. My main one is definitely Castbox, but because I have Google Assistants all throughout the area I live in the home, I have all these Google smart speakers. So I use Google Podcasts for that reason. So it's it's a mess. It's a bit of a mess. So what I'm basically trying to say is it's hell, but try to manage it the best way you can.
I don't know. I agree with you. There's just so much choice out there, and there's so much redundancy. I really I think it's too much at this point. I think fragmentation in a chat marketplace is ridiculous. I understand why it's happening. I get that all these companies want a piece of the big pie. Want your information, want your messages so that they can mine them and generate some informative advertising content. I don't know what else it could be, right? Why would a million different chat applications open up other than just to get different perspectives on different people's chat messages?
Right.
So I just think it's ridiculous, especially when one company makes 17 different chat applications. It's what are you doing? You're fragmenting your own audience, and you're actually making the audience of each one of your applications more angry at that application because you're spreading out your best developers. It doesn't make any sense. Why is there a million different Hangouts? There's Hangouts chat, Allo. What is the point of it? And you're constantly killing off projects like that. I don't know. I can go on an even longer rant about this stuff, but I understand, some of the stuff makes sense. Maybe even podcast app kind of makes sense. Why there's so many. It's kind of an easier app to build, so there's a lot of people that start off building kind of a podcast app. Definitely,
and there's pros and cons to every one of them, right?
Yeah, there's little pros and cons, but for the most part, you're right. They work really well. I think for podcasting in general, I use Pocket Casts just because it has that web version.
Right.
So that web version allows me to go on my computer and just pick up where I left off on a podcast. I haven't found a different service that has a good one like that.
That's what I use Castbox for. Is the link between the two.
Okay, so there we go. So it's the same system. I would probably use Castbox just the same. There would be no difference for me if I knew about it before I already purchased Pocket Casts.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing too. Is some of them are free, some of them are subscription, some of them have tiers, so a free tier, etc.
Yeah.
One of the things I was going to say too is, I don't know if you've paid attention to the Photoshop scenario on phone. There's a bunch of Photoshop apps. It'll be Adobe, I can literally type it in, but it'll be Adobe Photoshop, cut, crop, whatever, and it there's a whole bunch of them. All so what these guys are doing is they're separating their apps. I just typed in Adobe Photoshop. There's Adobe Photoshop Express, which is photo editor and collage maker. Then there's also Adobe Photoshop Mix, which is cut out, combine, and create. And then there's Adobe Photoshop Fix, which does that. Then there's Adobe Photoshop Lightroom, which of course is slightly different. So I mean, there's some of these are, they should be separate, but it's why are there a couple of apps here for the same thing? Why is it that I have to cut in this one, and then I'd have to import it into this one to make it into a collage? What's going on here? And yeah. PlayStation, to take it out of the web development scene, PlayStation, for example, has the PlayStation app, and then they have PS messages. I have a social folder on my phone. I'm gonna read this out. I'm gonna read these apps. I got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, Slack, Messenger, Messages, PS Messages, Discord, BBM, Skype, Twist, and Pages Manager. And I'm sure there's something in here that I forgot. Like, this is insane. And then, of course, like, you can be messaged within programs. So you can be messaged, I've already mentioned Instagram, but you can be messaged within there. And there was rumor of Instagram making their own chat app. So there's that. And then there's other things like you can be messaged in other programs. Like, you could be messaged in Reddit. YouTube has its own chat inside of it now. So you can chat inside of YouTube. Like, this is app overload, folks.
It's app hell.
Slamming the phone down. It's app overload. Yeah, like,
there's too much. Choice is great, but at some point it just becomes too much, especially when it's coming from reputable companies fighting with themselves. Absolutely. Like Google Play Music and YouTube Music.
Oh my god.
Fantastic.
And Google Play Music is compatible with, at my last check, with Google Assistant here in Canada anyway. Yeah. YouTube Music is not a selectable service at my last check in Canada in Google Assistant as a music player. What is going on?
They don't release minimal viable products. Like, they don't think through what is a minimal viable product. They just release something that, like, oh, this one plays music. But you're Google. You can't do that. You can't release something that just does one thing when you have a million different services that are all tied together. You need to make sure that it works with your services, your own services. We're not asking you to, like, link into a different, like totally Microsoft. We're not asking you to link to Microsoft. Link to your own services, please.
There's a piece that I've struggled to write because I like to write just standard text stuff on Medium, and there's a piece that I've had, like, kind of in the works for a real long time regarding the problem with the ecosystem. The ecosystem of anything is a really great idea, but then the ecosystem is also run by capitalism and therefore is fragmented. Prime example, I purchased a one of those TP-Link smart plugs, and I had to use I think it's called Casa app in order to use that thing. I also have a smart home leak detector. That's a Honeywell one. That needs to go in the Honeywell thing. Now, in Google Assistant, you can, control these things to an extent if you connect your account and connect those devices to the Google Assistant. But the Google Assistant, in the Google Home app specifically, does not have a physical switch on there. So now I have the Casa app if I want to have a physical switch. And the Google Assistant app can only do it via voice. But if I buy the Google Home display, there's physical switches on the screen. So we know that it's possible, they just don't do it. And then I know from HomeKit, which is the Apple one, as far as I know, has the same problem where you have to download the person's app. Fine. If you have to dump it in a folder and you have the space in your phone, fine. If you have to dump it in there, fine. But the HomeKit ones, as far as I've seen, and I don't own it, but as far as I've seen from other people, they do have an actual separate, like, they can just go to the HomeKit app or whatever they go to, and they can click it. And since I have a Samsung phone, I have a frickin' SmartThings app. Now, I don't know whether that's uninstallable, I haven't checked, but this is Samsung SmartThings. So now I got this going on too. And Honeywell connected to my Google Assistant, but that particular device, my leak detector, is not compatible with Google Assistant. So, like, now I got a Honeywell app. It's app overload, folks. I'm peeking the mic. Ah, God. Like this, I know this is supposed to be web development, and I wanted to really touch on, like, there's a lot of these web apps and a lot of these web programs or a lot of these websites that are coming out with with apps, or apps coming out with web development or web like equivalents. Like, you could use that web version of WhatsApp or whatever by, like, connecting the app to it. And there's a couple of things like that. BBM has one in beta and other things like that. Like, there are ones like that, but that's even fragmented because you could. Some of them just log in. Some of them require the phone. Now you got a whole bunch of tabs open, which is using a bunch of RAM because it's Chrome. Oh my God.
Yep.
I was going to try to provide a solution in this segment, and I don't have one because I just riled myself up.
There is no solution. You just got to live with it. You got to ride it out until companies smarten up and start to release one really good app instead of 10 really bad ones. So...
The only thing, and I tried this, the only thing I tried Blackberry Hub on Android, and what I was going to do was delete all my icons for my various accounts. Like,
so I think you should explain what Blackberry Hub is, because I don't think a lot of our listeners will know what it is.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so Blackberry Hub is is an app from BlackBerry. It basically is more or less adapted from the BlackBerry 10 days, where, so you know how on Android, for example, you know, if you get a notification, it's in that lock screen or whatever, but generally speaking, it's in that shade at the top. You pull down from the top and there's all your notifications. What BlackBerry Hub was to BB10 was you could go all the way over to the leftmost screen, and on that leftmost screen there would be the hub, and that's where all your notifications were located. And a lot of them would so it would be like, you know, BBM, here's your BBM, here's your email from these accounts, here's your Facebook, here's your Twitter notification. You click on it, it takes you right there. And then you could literally do a gesture on the screen and literally swipe right back to the hub and go through. So you could go top to bottom. You could go like, I'm going to go into this app, then Facebook, then Twitter, then email. Yeah, real quick.
I think a big plus of it was it had not only notifications, it had your actual messages there. So that means that, like, your notification center is great and all, but once you actually action on a message, it goes away. Where the BlackBerry Hub, it wouldn't go away. You can actually see your older notifications in chronological order from all your different apps.
Yeah, it literally just like took the shade. It didn't like kind of like the notification shade, but like made it almost its own app, but it was like always there. And that's how you did your notifications on there. It was like really, really versatile, and it was really plugged in to the OS. So when BlackBerry, you know, inevitably switched to Android, they brought the hub over, and obviously since it's Android, they have to use it. It's different. So it like kind of adapts to your hub. So it is its own email client. You sign into your emails directly on the hub, and then you can connect your various accounts. So for example, just looking here, I have a few emails accounts connected. I got my text messages that go here. I got some call logs, LinkedIn, Discord, Facebook, Google Hangouts. Oh, good. That wasn't in that folder. Mm-hmm. Instagram. I got a couple Twitter accounts, a Reddit. Like, everything's in here. But because it's Android, and the workflow on Android is sort of like steered more towards you using the shade, I constantly find myself just looking at the shade. Or with my always on display, an icon will appear, because I got the SA Plus, and I just double tap on the latest icon, and it'll open up my latest notification. So I find myself not using the hub as much. But I was going to try to use it like I used to on BB10 by literally just like deleting all my like shortcuts, having the apps installed, and just doing it on here. But I'm on the fence about that, and like some of the apps it interacted with is kind of weird. So for example, if I send somebody a BBM message, so let's say somebody says hello to me on BBM, it'll say, hey, there's a BBM message. Click on BBM, it'll open up that person's chat. I could say, hello there. It will actually show my hello there, and since they're both BlackBerry apps, it'll show me the little blue D for delivered and the little green R for if it was read. Mm-hmm. But if let's say, Mike, you send me a Hangouts message that says, again, hello, and I click on that, and it says a new notification, I click on that, it'll take me to the chat, and I say hello there, all it does is mark that Hangouts one as read. It doesn't say that, it doesn't show my reply.
Oh, that's kind of weird.
So yeah, then I'm like...
Inconsistencies, right?
And so then I'm like, did I reply to that? I don't remember. But on the BB Hub, like a BB10 Hub, with the exception of a few Android apps that you could install on there, there wasn't that problem. You always saw like, oh yes, I did actually answer that.
Yeah.
So the inconsistency kind of like tosses me over. I do really like the email though, so I do keep it around for that. But, but that's just my 2 cents. So that was my attempt at trying to manage all this, and I think now I have given up. I have Prime Photos back at my photos, which I had uninstalled because it was draining my battery.
Yep.
Well, because I don't know what happened. I had an OS update, and God knows what happened. But I have Prime Photos, Google Photos, and OneDrive backing up my photos, and they're all backing up different folders. So I literally have folders everywhere. And then way back in the day, I used to, or I still do, have all my contacts on my old Microsoft account, and I was trying to transfer them to my new Microsoft account. And I went through this thing, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to have one contacts list, and it's going to be synced to all my work accounts and all my personal accounts. And I pressed sync. It got about 40% way through. It broke, froze, and it never worked again. Mm-hmm. So now I have contacts scattered throughout all my accounts, and one of them is kind of like a master that has most of them. So I have contacts everywhere. So now what I do is I just sync every account to everything. Everything's all syncing at the same time, and I never have an interruption, but probably terrible battery life because I have so many things running. Mm-hmm. But that's how I deal with app overload. I don't know if you have more comments on that, but...
No, I think we should wrap it up. I think everyone's heard everything they need to hear on app overload.
And that's the web news. We need a little jingle. Whatever. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think that's it. And that's all. If you wouldn't mind hitting one of those reviews things on Apple Podcasts or on your iTunes there, that'd be really great. Give us a review. Whatever podcast app you're using in your app overload, feel free to subscribe and like us or do whatever your various platform does. That'd be much appreciated. We're on the YouTubes. You can look us up, HTML, all the things. We got the podcast up there if you'd prefer to listen to the audio version on there. We also have the website coming soon. We also have our social media channels. So, of course, our Facebook, our Instagram, and our Twitter. Our Facebook and Instagram are HTML all the things, and our Twitter is HTML everything. And you can always just look us up and find us there. And like I said, the website is coming soon. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Signing off.